Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Zinghausen is with you. Today is May 31st. There are many interesting news stories in this episode. The world will have to accept a new security architecture. Putin may gain 2 more countries in his sphere of influence. And the end of a great era in the USA and the beginning of a golden era. And Fico is already threatening Europe with a major war. And the former national security advisor to Donald Trump explained what he really wants. And also about how Senator Graham came to Kyiv and brought good news for Ukraine and very unpleasant news for the Kremlin. All this and more in today's episode. At the end, we'll see what else I've taught artificial intelligence, how it envisions Kim Jong-un. And not just sees it, but how he depicts it. This is going to be extremely interesting. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So let's get into it. So today I saw some information on Telegram. It started circulating on Telegram channels that Poland is building a line of fortifications on the border with the Kaliningrad region. And apparently they're even relocating some locals from there. In reality, this isn't news, because Poland is actively implementing its large-scale program called the Eastern Shield. This program was launched back in May 2024. And what's planned is a massive network of defensive structures along the border, not only with Russia, but also with Belarus. They want to complete the project by 2028. You see, barbed wire and fences aren't usually built on the border with normal neighbors. But since, unfortunately, we have an unpredictable neighbor, not just us, but also Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Finland, well, we all have to put up barriers. And here's a typical representative of the Russian Federation, the head of the Defense Committee of the Russian Federation, Kartapolov, who, with a straight face and brazenly, declared that if Ukraine does not accept the conditions of the Russian Federation, then Ukraine will be left without Kharkiv, without Sumy, without Zaporizhia, without Odessa, without Dnipro, and without Mykolaiv. That's what he said. So not only are they demanding the withdrawal of troops from the territories they failed to capture, but they're also threatening that Odessa and other major cities' regional centers will be seized by the Russians. Let me remind you, these are the same people who hung banners in Kherson saying Russia is here forever. Remember how they later fled from Kherson? Those are some of the most shameful pages. I wonder how they explain that to themselves. How is that an invincible army? Wow, how? Why did they run away from Kherson? How do they explain that to themselves? Well, according to them, there's supposedly no one to fight there, just Nazis and Satanists, as they say. So that's how it is. And by the way, that Kartapolov, he said Odessa. That really pisses me off. Any Odessan would immediately give him a musical moose for saying Odessa like that. But for Kartapolov, I think it would be something more serious. As they say, better watch your back. There will be enough scooters for everyone. Although, with the way things are going, I think he's more likely to end up in prison back home. Because after the war ends, Putin will, of course, start appointing scapegoats and sending them off to prison. So, for the public, he'll be saying that everything is a huge victory, everything's great, but everyone will understand that there is no victory at all. And now to the main point. To really understand where this world is heading, the new role of dictators and the new security architecture, it was very enlightening to read Keith Kellogg's comments. And a lot of things suddenly made sense. So the US is ready to stop NATO's expansion toward Russia's borders, and Ukraine's membership in the alliance is not up for discussion. Keith Kellogg talked about this in an interview with ABC News. And in general, Russia's demand is to receive written guarantees of NATO's non-expansion to the east. And for us, Ukraine's accession to NATO is not up for discussion. We are not the only country that thinks this way. I can name at least 4 countries in NATO that also have doubts. After all, the consent of all 32 NATO countries is required for someone to join. Yes, indeed, all 32 countries must say yes. What's this? Let's try to guess. Which countries are these besides the USA? Maybe it's Hungary. Or maybe it's Slovakia. In my opinion, do they even deserve to be in the alliance if they pursue such a policy? That's how it is. And look, here's what Keith Kellogg also says. He says, and they're talking not only about Ukraine, but also about Georgia and Moldova. We say, okay, we can stop NATO's expansion to your borders. This is a matter of their security. Someday, this era will simply be called the era of greedy, short-sighted cowards in history textbooks. pardon my French, but how did previous presidents of the United States manage to defend security, including that of their allies? And what do you think if all the previous presidents had been so accommodating to Putin and said, well, okay, this is your sphere of influence, we won't accept these countries? If Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which happened during Putin's time in 2004, had not been accepted into NATO, what are the chances that by now Putin would already be in those countries, would have attacked them, and would be saving some mythical Russian speakers there? Please tell me. I think the probability is 100%. This is not just a compromise. What's happening now is a revision of the entire post-war architecture of Europe. And the US is signaling, practically waving semaphore signals to Putin, that they are ready to agree on new red lines to the detriment of their Eastern European allies, especially Ukraine. That is, for Ukraine, this really diminishes the value of NATO and reinforces the sense that the West is, in fact, willing to bargain over fates for the sake of some big deal, a major agreement with Putin. That's why, of course, regional alliances are everything for us. In other words, unless the situation changes, just one person, like Orban, can indefinitely block Ukraine's accession to NATO. That is, this could go on, or rather indefinitely, as long as he remains in power. We'll get to Orban and Fico in a moment. They're already waging war against the European Union over there. That's it. They've completely lost their minds. We'll be there now. But that's why regional alliances are everything for us, with those who truly understand what Russia is. I've already mentioned Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. It would be great to definitely include a nuclear state here, France or the United Kingdom. And of course, we need to strengthen relations with Erdogan. And I'd probably like to remind the king of deals that joining NATO isn't done on a whim, just because we feel like it, but in order to receive protection, to become part of it ourselves, and to contribute to collective defense. Finland and Sweden changed their neutral status, which they had maintained for decades, not because they simply wanted to, but because a ghoul psychopath attacked Ukraine. And in this context, these words from Keith Kellogg saying, okay, we understand Moldova, Georgia, yes, we agree that NATO should not expand there. If I were in Moldova or Georgia's place, I would be very concerned, very much so. In fact, in these words, they were simply handed over into Putin's sphere of influence. We understand, yes, that's how it is, but after statements like these, if I were Moldova, I would immediately start addressing the issue of the unrecognized Transnistria, because I guarantee you, first of all, the recent elections showed that Russia is ready to spend enormous resources to install its own government there and, ultimately, to pull Moldova completely into its orbit. And another thing, that is, this was a very interesting interview because Kellogg, he broadcasts what Trump, for example, cannot say out loud, but Kellogg can. The US could withdraw from the process. But that's not all Kellogg said. He said if he feels, Trump, that he's being used and there's no progress in sight, he will basically tell you, we're done with this. Europe, now it's your, I'm quoting, deal with it yourselves. When asked what would happen to Ukraine, Kellogg stated that it's not just about Ukraine, but about preventing a major escalation worldwide. And here's another extremely important, crucial point. Look, I'm quoting. It's about the whole world, because now the situation is completely different from during Trump's first presidential term. Back then, we had Russia separately, China separately, Iran separately, and North Korea separately. Now they have all united and they have agreements. So because of this, the level of risk increases sharply and very bad things could happen. He's actually speaking in Trump's own words here. Very bad, very bad. Then you'll already find yourself in a reactive mode in the midst of the process. And this... so North Korea is sending troops to Russia. Everyone knows this. They're fighting near Kursk. But the reverse is also possible. This is an important part. According to the agreement, if a war breaks out between South and North Korea, Russia is obligated to send its troops in support of the DPRK. And then you might see Russian troops on the Korean peninsula. Do you really want that? I don't think anyone wants that. Kellogg describes global escalation as a likely scenario and makes it clear that the US might step out of the game. In other words, this is essentially speaking about the possible final transition or shift of the war in Ukraine into a regional European conflict, as some analysts suggest. That's it. It's yours now. Deal with it yourselves. We warned you. But the most important thing is that under Trump, the US might abandon Ukraine for the sake of stabilizing some kind of relations with authoritarian regimes. Do you understand? So in fact, it's confirmation that the dictators did everything right, absolutely everything right. They scared people properly and forced them to make favorable compromises. You don't want a war on the Korean Peninsula? Then give me more countries in my sphere of influence. Come on, make concessions on Ukraine. In other words, the US is voluntarily surrendering, just handing over its position as a world leader and defender of democracy. Essentially, Trump is making it clear that everyone is on their own. That's it. And if it's profitable, I'll even trade with those who will fight against you in the alliance of dictatorships. We've really hit rock bottom, as they say. But it's clear that we already understood this. Kellogg is just saying it all out loud. But Ukraine still has quite a few confident, determined allies. So here it's important to understand that yesterday's visit by Lindsey Graham and Mr. Blumenthal from the Democrats and Lindsey Graham from the Republicans demonstrated bipartisan support. That's one thing. And the statement Lindsey Graham made was exactly what was needed at this moment. And yes, Trump is not in the US forever. That's also something to keep in mind. So Lindsey Graham announced that the Senate will begin considering a new bipartisan bill on sanctions against Russia as early as next week. There will be a meeting in Istanbul on Monday, and the Senate may start considering it on Monday or maybe on Tuesday. He has unprecedented support. 82 senators already support him. Overall, both this visit and the fact that Lindsey Graham made this statement right now are extremely important. He also criticized these peace talks and said that they are complete nonsense. I'm simplifying what he said for you. Basically, he doesn't expect anything from them at all. Well, the logic is clear. Putin initiated these negotiations as soon as the threat of sanctions started looming over him. Immediately, he was like, no, let's have the first meeting in Istanbul. So then that thug negotiator Medinsky showed up. He started boasting just like Kartapolov, saying, if anything, we'll just seize everything over there. We'll take 6 regions. We can't take 4, but we'll take 6. Then everyone realized, of course, that none of them actually want any peace negotiations. Trump said, I'll show everyone now. Putin launched missile strikes on Ukraine. Trump said, that's it, enough, I'm imposing sanctions. But I think he was definitely bluffing. Someone promised him some kind of deal after the war, just a brilliant, huge golden deal, and he really doesn't want to impose those sanctions. But the senator says, we'll push it through. So now these negotiations are also just for Putin to buy himself some time. If there ends up being a memorandum about a memorandum, and now let's have a third round, and there we'll show you, like some kind of shy lady, you know. So, third round, there we'll show you 2 more points, and then later we'll show you another 4 points. Complete nonsense. Hit them with sanctions, and even if they start behaving well, I've said this many times, Putin is such a vile character. You have to keep hitting him, keep pushing him down, so he stays there under the floorboards. Even if it seems to you that he's not doing anything bad, you probably just don't know. He's up to some kind of mischief. Keep hitting him over and over. And yes, calling for international pressure is the most important thing. So the rat has been cornered. Now it needs to be finished off. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you already have, make sure to hit the bell. So, as they say, once again, Russia is demanding the demilitarization of Ukraine. So sick of it? People have already forgotten that word because some Russian experts couldn't even pronounce it. And now they're bringing it back into circulation. They want the demilitarization of Ukraine. At the negotiations in Istanbul, we will once again raise the issue of Ukraine's demilitarization, Karasin stated. This is the guy who went to Saudi Arabia for negotiations and talked about nothing for 12 hours. The demilitarization of Ukraine is one of our fundamental positions. All aspects that are relevant for our country and for the international situation as a whole will be discussed. Oh, Karasin, just get lost with your demilitarization. Earlier, Lavrov was throwing out that they would discuss neutral status. repealing laws that, in his opinion, discriminate against Russian speakers, and with the church too. They want to bring back all that FSB nest here again, the ROC stuff. And of course, partial lifting of sanctions as well. You sure want a lot. Instead of lifting sanctions, slap even more on them. Then they'll start behaving properly. Basically, they want to control Ukraine's domestic policy. This is about those laws about the church and everything else. Obviously, that's no compromise at all. And regarding this demilitarization, you only need to disarm someone in two cases. First, so that they can't attack anyone, and second, so that they can't defend themselves. So, the idea that Ukraine would want to attack a nuclear state like Russia, I think no one at all. Actually, that could be a test for sanity. Ask someone on the street, do you believe that Ukraine could attack a nuclear state? If they say yes, well, then they should go get treatment and not forget to take their pills. So we're not savages. We don't want what belongs to others. We just want what's ours. Give us back what belongs to us. We don't need anything else. So does that mean they're demanding demilitarization so that Ukraine can't defend itself? See how it turns out, right? Could Russia really break a treaty or some kind of promise? Of course not. That's never happened before. Not with Chechnya, not with the Budapest Memorandum, not with Putin's statements that he wouldn't go to war against Ukraine, that he didn't need Crimea. That's why they're like old, nasally conmen behaving like some kind of angry old exhibitionists in the park. That's exactly how they look right now. By the way, friends, let me remind you that we have an important fundraiser for the Freedom of Russia Legion, who are fighting not only on the front lines, but also deep behind enemy lines. It's a major fundraiser for electronic warfare systems, stations, and mainly for drones and various interesting devices that send holy fire down on the heads of those fiends who have come to our land. It's very easy to support the fundraiser. There's a link in the comments and a link in the description of this video. You'll also find the Legion's bank card number there. There's also a PayPal account for those who want to help from abroad. A huge thank you to everyone. I always say this. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. It leads directly to the Legion's bank. And since people are accommodating Putin, Rasputin, accommodating Putin, how can certain fans not get brazen enough to try to stick it to him in his oil-filled backside? Now Fico has completely lost all sense of shame. Slovakia is threatening the European Union. Have you noticed that Fico always has? Maybe he's always like this, I don't know. He has a face like he's already done something bad and is just waiting to get smacked with a slipper. Like a kid who's been caught misbehaving, right? So Fico is spreading his wings. Fico stated that abolishing the right of veto will lead to the end of the European Union and a massive military conflict. Imposing mandatory political opinions. Abolishing the right of veto. Punishing the sovereign and the brave. A new Iron Curtain. Preferring war over peace is the end of the pan-European project. It is a departure from democracy. It is a harbinger of a massive military conflict, Fico said. Did you get what just happened? So basically, Fico is blatantly threatening some mythical conflict in Europe if he and Orban are prevented from blocking anti-Russian sanctions and aid to Ukraine. And what do you think? Is Fico predicting a global military conflict for the European Union with his own hands, or maybe with his and Orban's? No, he can't pull that off. Or maybe Russia. So basically, he's just blatantly threatening the European Union, saying that if you introduce some kind of veto, then you'll get a war. Well, that's just ridiculous. And of course, calling yourself sovereign and brave, that's just over the top. And then there's the talk about an attack on democracy. He should go tell Orban across the border about democracy, the guy who has already built a dictatorship there, just missing a single nail. And of course, Orban is right there. It's like, how can you have Biba without Boba, right? A magnifying glass without a handle. Orban has now openly gone against the European Union, criticized its policies, and declared that he will never allow Ukraine to join the EU. Well, we've heard it, but what we heard was this. Ukraine won't be in the EU as long as Orban is in power. That's how Ukraine heard it. Well, the key point here is, as long as Orban is in power. And in our memorandum, which let me remind you, we handed over to the Russians, but they didn't give us theirs. In other words, their shell game diplomacy is still working for them. That is, we are proposing a ceasefire on land, at sea, and in the air, monitored by international partners. The New York Times reports that this is included in our memorandum. We are offering specifics, a truce under supervision. Moscow, of course. Transparency? What transparency? Muddy waters are Putin's element. This 1.5-meter tall card sharp is now blatantly dropping cards from his sleeve, but everyone pretends nothing is happening. In other words, he behaves this way because he's allowed to. We've talked about this with you more than once already. Just one phone call or a single public statement that if the shelling doesn't stop by tomorrow, sanctions will fly like pigeons. Believe me, that very evening every suitcase and travel bag in boutiques within a 5-kilometer radius of the Kremlin will be bought up. And the next morning the shelling will stop. That's how it will be. But while Trump is still getting up to speed over there, or maybe just pretending to, OPEC Plus has gotten involved, and on May 31st, that is today, at an online meeting, they discussed a possible increase in production in July. And they decided to continue increasing by 411,000 barrels per day. And they've already increased production by that much. And the possibility of a more significant increase is being considered, especially in light of Kazakhstan's statements about not wanting to cut production. It's been a while since I paid Tokayev any compliments, but here it's not just no need, produce as much as you want. Go ahead, turn on all your capacities if you like. If OPEC Plus also leaves this quota system, then off we go. And let me remind you, if the trend of prices below $60 per barrel continues, then as early as this fall, Putin will have to figure out where to cut his own economy and social sector or reduce the war. The Russian budget is based on a price of $70 per barrel. So OPEC, don't stop, just keep going. And you know, it was also very enlightening to read John Bolton's interview. He is the former national security advisor to Donald Trump, a real thorn in his side because he constantly criticizes him and exposes, lifts the veil on everything. And he said that Trump actually wants the Nobel Prize and that he would abandon Ukraine for the sake of that Nobel Prize, according to Bolton. In general, it's useful, because Trump, he doesn't stick to his words, he blabs everywhere. And as for, there are people who can later relay all of this. All Trump wants is the Nobel Peace Prize. He has wanted it ever since it was successfully awarded to Barack Obama, undeservedly, in Trump's opinion. Whether he gets the prize for Ukraine, for the Middle East, or for mediating between India and Pakistan doesn't matter at all. And that's very clear and logical. It might seem like we're just discussing obvious truths here, but still, you have to admit there's always this little bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'll snap and really show what he's capable of. But yes, the security of allies is not on Donald Trump's agenda. I'm talking specifically about the allies here. This makes any diplomatic line from Washington inherently unstable because it no longer depends on logical analysis. When you're dealing with a narcissist, it doesn't depend on logic or analysis, but rather on some kind of situational image-based benefit. I want it, like a spoiled 5-year-old child. Does Obama have a peace prize? Give me one too. I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it. That's why when Trump said that the golden era for America was coming, he was absolutely right. Not a great era, not an era of global leadership, but specifically a golden era of deals. By the way, I came across some news that Azarov, if anyone still remembers, that bloodsucker Azarov, Nikolai Azarov, has become an academician in Russia. I'm just thinking, isn't Kadyrov enough for them as an academician? Professor Yanukovych approves, as they say. And now for the segment, How Artificial Intelligence Learns. I asked it to read and listen to my programs and then come up with some nicknames for Kim Jong-un. And then I asked it to draw how it envisions Kim Jong-un based on what it had listened to. So of course there were some strange ones, but chicken un, I think that was just brilliant. And in addition, the soulless artificial intelligence, of course, called Kim Jong-un the chubby apocalypse. I have to say, at this point, even I am starting to be a little afraid of this artificial intelligence. And this is how it sees Kim Jong-un. Yes, that's how it drew him. I think it's just chic, absolutely gorgeous. And also, it called him that because Kim Jong-un loves all sorts of luxury items, expensive champagne, crystal, and so on. It called him the Pyongyang Chanel guy for his love of luxury. Well, the artificial intelligence is learning. It really is. I'll keep you updated from time to time. It helps me a lot with work-related things. And here it really did a great job. Take care of yourselves, friends, take care of your loved ones, and if possible, support the fundraiser. It's important. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and of course, glory to Ukraine.